Hi guys, welcome back to the Beyond Football podcast. Today we've got a special episode. We've got an ex-footballer from the States. We're going to be hearing him. He's going to be giving us insights into the football journey of a player from the United States compared to what we normally hear over here in the UK. We're going to be hearing how he made something out of himself beyond football. So, Jose Tellez, welcome to the Beyond Football podcast.
Daniel, thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited to be here. I rarely get to talk about the journey I've been on after football has ended for me personally. So I'm excited to tell the story.
No, that's beautiful. That's what this podcast is made for. But let's get into it. What does football mean to you compared to what it did mean to you whilst you were playing?
Oh man, that's a fantastic question. I would say for me personally, what football means to me now, it's you think that after my playing days, because I had so many teammates in my past who maybe their appreciation for football may have dwindled off a little bit after their playing days were done, maybe due to injury, due to other things where they didn't feel as motivated to be as tuned into the game itself. For me personally, I've transitioned wholly into a fan, and I love it, man. I think all of us as players, I'm sure you'll agree, we all kind of had, you know, massive, immense passion for this game as a player, but it's different as a fan. It's different when you're not having to be as locked in as a competitor, and I can purely just wake up and be throw all of my passion to my favorite club, to my local team, and kind of put it on display in a way that I was never able to as a player. And so for me, completely different levels of passion. I was always someone who brought it all to every single match. I always wear my emotions on my sleeve. And I think now I just get to do it a little bit differently as a fan, and I love it.
It makes sense. And was it always a dream for you? Because over in the States, I know it's a big thing you're passionate about, football not being as big. So we don't really hear about journeys of people getting into football over there. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think so. And that's a great question, man. For those who aren't as aware of what the culture is like here in the States, I don't want to go as far as saying it's non-existent. I think it definitely is. But it really depends on where you live, what you grew up around, right? In the States, if depending on where you grew up in this country, you could be a massive NBA fan or a massive NFL fan, right? And so proper football, the way that I see it, thankfully, I grew up in a family where my parents, my grandparents, everybody lives and breathes football, right? I didn't even know it was called soccer here in the States until I was 10 or 11 years old. And so, we grew up around this game. It means everything to me. Not that I don't support NBA, not that I don't support NFL. I love sports in general. I am a competitor down to my very core as a human being. But I do think that football, there's just nothing else like it. Whether we're talking about football that's played out in the UK with the Premier League being the biggest league in the world and everyone very much tuning into those matches, all the way down to Major League Soccer, and me doing watch-alongs for FC Dallas, which is my hometown club. And, I have a very special connection with them as having grown up in that academy. And it's great to support them now as a fan, not so much as a player, right? So for me, growing up in the States, it's different. There, maybe we missed a little bit of the culture that you grew up with there in the UK. But I don't think it changes my fandom. I think if anything, I'm longing for those opportunities to have the moments that many European fans get to experience week in and week out, right?
Mm.
I think there are definitely bucket list items that I have regarding the Prem, La Liga, Champions League. There's going to be a lot that I do as I continue to go down this rabbit hole of being a fan, right? My playing days are now over, but it doesn't change who I am when I think about football. It's growing up here in the States, it may have changed my views a little bit, and I have other sports that definitely kind of reign supreme out here. But man, it doesn't change how fun this game really is for everybody who's locked into it.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And what was your experience of getting to FC Dallas Academy, quite a big team over there? How was it like
Yeah.
over?
You know what, man? It's It's everything I kind of thought it would be. At the time, and granted, I'm 32 years old now. When I was coming to the academy, this was 2008, 2009, earliest days of the academy. And I think one thing your viewers should probably note when it comes to Major League Soccer academies is that they're still very, very new. They're
Mm.
maybe a decade plus old, or 15 years old at the heart of it. So when I was starting, the academies were just announced. They were just forming. And you really only had 4 or 5 different choices in my part of the country, FC Dallas being one of them. And in terms of where you wanted to play your football and how you wanted to be developed. And so, of course, with the pro team having a pipeline to that academy, that was the one that was prioritized by everyone. I remember trying out for the academy, thousands and thousands of players coming out to try out. Only 20 were going to be selected.
Wow.
And thankfully, I was one of the few, but I was amongst a group of extremely talented players, some of them who are still playing today. So you think about the Funes Mori twins, one of whom has played for the likes of Everton, for the Argentinian national team, who's won Copa America. The other, Funes Mori, playing down in Mexico right now professionally, has had some stints with the Mexico national team. So I think at the end of the day, of course, we've had numerous players go on to play for, various top tier universities here in the States where, college soccer is still very much a viable opportunity, being able to prioritize your studies alongside your football. So playing for that academy, I don't think I realized in the moment how, I don't want to say privileged I was, but how much of an opportunity that was for me. While we had some players who went on to go pro immediately following their youth academy days, but for the vast majority of us, we all went on to play kind of university ball, and that was kind of the pathway in American soccer back then, back in 2009, 2010, 2011, where the sport wasn't as big as it is today. You basically either would try to go pro and play for pennies, right? Or you would go to university ball, prioritize your studies, and see if you can earn a degree. And I chose that path for myself. But
Mm.
all in all, I consider myself very privileged to play for that academy, man. And if you look back at it now, FC Dallas Academy is probably one of the most, if not the most successful academy in Major League Soccer, producing the likes of Weston McKennie, Ricardo Pepi, so many players that have gone on to play professionally either overseas in Europe or playing for the U.S. men's national team today. So I consider myself pretty privileged to come out of that academy.
Yeah. And what age does academy football start over there?
It is pretty young now. If I think if academy football can technically start as young as U8, U9, right?
Mm.
So decently young. I know in other parts of the world they start younger, but I would say for where football is in this part of the world, 8, 9, 10 years old is pretty young. And they try to keep them in the system as long as possible. I would say when the footballers are younger, you get a lot more competition, interestingly enough, amongst other youth clubs in this area who are, looking to poach talent, bring those players over to their academies, their clubs. And so you get a lot of players in their youth days who are trying clubs out, right? Bouncing around, their parents trying to understand who's the best fit from a coaching perspective, from a longevity perspective, right? How long can I remain in the system? But I think the one that commands the most power because they have the pipeline to professional is FC Dallas. And when you look at our team today, even professionally, right? How many of those starters on our roster came from our academy? Jesus Ferreira, Paxton Pomacall. There's starters on that roster today that were in the academy 10 years ago. And so that's still pretty cool to see. That's very much a core part of FC Dallas's model. Trying to get them as young as we could possibly get them and keeping them in the system as long as we can until we're at a point now where we can say they're on our first team and they're
Mm.
helping us get points on the table and create results for the fans. So I'm very proud of what we've done so far, but I will say this: we still have a long way to go, right? I think we're still figuring it out when it comes to the youngest age groups possible.
Yeah. And when you were at the academy when it first started, what did like a week look like?
Oh man. Well, first off, I think I think Americans, maybe not everyone, right? But I think for many of us, we weren't training at the same level as academies and clubs overseas were. So what I mean by that is, the first things first. I would imagine the number of training sessions a week. If you weren't in the academy or in the youth academy system, you probably just weren't training that often. Like you weren't training, multiple times a day. When we broke into the academy, that shifted immediately, right? So, first things first, I had to give up local high school football, local high school soccer. That was a stipulation for everybody who played academy here. They were protecting their investment, and it was very much a controversial rule. So back then, you had a lot of local youth talent that would play anywhere they could play, right? Whether they were playing academy ball or not, I know I wanted to play in as many leagues as possible. I wanted to represent my school, my town. I wanted to try and win a state championship. I wanted to do all of those things. But when we joined the academy, that was the number one rule: was you were not allowed to go play for other leagues, other clubs. You signed for this club, for this academy system, and that's that. It doesn't matter if it's a pickup game, right? Like they didn't want you to get hurt, so you couldn't go do other things. And so that was the first major adjustment I had to kind of make. And I'll be honest, between you and I, and now we're years past this, I never really I stopped for a little bit, but then I picked things right back up. I wanted to play high school ball. I wanted to represent my school, my town. And so I just did it. I mean, I thought worst case scenario, it was going to be a slap on the wrist, but ultimately they never found out. And that ended up being the case for several of us who just loved the game. We wanted to play as much as often as we possibly could. We would play wherever we could. But a typical week, right? I was going to school during the day. A lot of the academy, as the academy matured, many of them were being relocated out to Frisco, Texas, which is where FC Dallas's academy is located. And they were going to school locally so that they could immediately transition over to training. That wasn't me. I was pretty early on in the process, and my parents were not going to allow me to transition schools like that. So we just made it work. I would travel about an hour to training every single day, Monday through Thursday. We would get Fridays off, and then Saturday and Sundays we would train against the first team. So going up against the likes of Kenny Cooper, being trained by Oscar Pareja when he was training the first team, and I think now he's I want to say he's at Orlando or one of the other MLS clubs. But getting to train against first team professionals that young was I still remember it, right? I still remember blocking a shot by Kenny Cooper, and he's the second leading goal scorer all time in the history of FC Dallas. And I remember, getting completely whacked by a number of the first team players because we're just youth academy players. I just remember all of those learning experiences, right? I'll never forget it. I think it was probably, for me, the peak of my youth career, being able to say that I had enough talent to be out there and provide some competition to the first team. And then it gave us a visual, right? It gave us something to go after. Like, this was the ultimate goal. If we do things right, we can be on the other side of the pitch over there with the first team, training, getting better, and then eventually playing professionally in front of our home crowd. So that was a typical week. And I think at the end of the day, that's as close to professional as we could possibly get.
Yeah. And injuries, they're quite a big thing in football. They can make or break
That they
you.
are.
How did your injury impact your outlook on football and how you seen football beyond that?
Yeah, man. They're a terrible part of the game. Terrible part of the game. Injuries have always. I got injured multiple times in my career. Some small, some big, right? Like most players do. I will say, as I got older, and it became much more prevalent my senior year of high school, going into university ball. I was getting injured more frequently. And I will say this, for any player who's listening, for anybody who's aspiring to be a pro, I think the one mistake players make so often, because we want to seem strong, we want to, be perceived, we want the world to know that our passion isn't going away, that it's always there. We sometimes play injured, right? We play injured. We know we're injured. We know we're not 100%. We know there's more that we could be doing to take care of ourselves. We know there's people we could be listening to to help us get back to 100%, but we don't. And I know several players like this, right? Where the passion just takes over. You want to play no matter what. And that was one of my biggest faults, I think, is that I had several injuries as I transitioned from the academy into university ball. That I think now looking back, hindsight's 2020, with how many injuries I kind of had that were small nagging injuries built up upon each other, one after another. I should have known that I wasn't doing the right things. I should have known that my body wasn't recuperating the right way, or something was off. Right? Whether it was my rehabilitation after training or my nutrition or whatever it may have been, something was off because I was continuously stacking up small nagging injuries. And I had people in my corner who were telling me to slow down, right? Who were telling me to, hey, resting a couple of weeks is going to be better than you being out for 6 to 8 weeks, right? But I think that I didn't know better. Nobody in my family had ever been on this path, right, to playing professional football or going through the trial days of a youth academy. Like no one was there to coach me on this. This was kind of just my opportunity, and I was navigating the best way I knew how. But I would say all of that culminated into year 2 of university ball, where I would say I injured myself past the point of return, right? My injury, my knees, both of them, in 2 different matches, completely went out. One from a forced tackle, the other, I think, from just purely wear and tear. I had no cartilage left in my knee. And it got to the point where you have doctors asking you, right? Like, what were you doing? Like there was nobody telling you how bad things were. Were you not listening? Were you not going to get treatment? Like, what happened? And it was to this day one of the most difficult experiences and periods of my life, because it was the first major transition I had to make as a young adult. All I'd known my entire life was football. That's it. If I was going to school, it was to play football. If I was with friends, it was to play football. I didn't know anything else. And so when that happened, I was 19, 20 years old. I was told that I had to basically be out for at least 6 to 9 months. And then at that point, they would assess whether or not I'd be able to come back. It wasn't even a guarantee, without major surgery, right? Which at that point, I come from very humble beginnings. My parents did not have the funds, right, to kind of put me through any major surgery, which is why I should have been careful every step of the way. And it didn't really pan out that way, right? And so those 6 to 9 months, man, were rough. Very rough, more mentally than anything else. I can confidently say I've never felt more alone than in that time period. I kind of shut off from the world. I shut myself off from the world. I went to university. I would show up to class and whatnot, but I just wasn't motivated anymore. My reason for even being there was gone. So it was, for those 6 to 9 months, it was a lot of self-reflection, mixed with all kinds of just dragging myself mentally, man. I mean, I know when you and I met, we've talked a little bit about this, but just the mental aspects of your game can't be stressed enough. I was not prepared for what my mental would be like going through this transition period of just not playing football anymore, at least not being on a path to professional anymore. I didn't know how to take it. I didn't know what this was going to be like. And at times, I'll be honest, man, I contemplated the worst, right? Like, what if I wasn't here anymore? What if I, if I can't play football, then what's the point of this life that I've been leading for the last 20 years? Like, all this time was wasted, right? It's easy to think that. It's easy to feel that way. And it took, family consistently checking on me. It took friends consistently checking on me to make sure that things didn't, turn out for the worst, right? But ultimately, that transition was so difficult. But it got me to where I am today. I'll confidently say that after almost a year, I transitioned from football into business ultimately. So that's the decision that I had to make. When I formally gave up football, it was because after those 9 months had come to an end, the doctors had basically said, look, like, you can still play, but I don't think you could do more than 20, 30 minutes at a time. Like, your knee is just too bad. Without a major surgery that would replace the cartilage in my knees, it would just be very, very difficult. So that's when I had to make the decision. Okay, if I'm not going to play football and this is not going to be my life, what am I going to do? What are my strengths? What value am I going to bring to the world? And I ultimately decided to pivot into business, and I wanted to be in the business of football in some form or fashion, whether it was on my own or working for a big company. And that's the route that I pursued. But it was, as you can tell, right, by my voice, man, it was just a very, very difficult time. It's something that I can't stress enough, man. Like having people close to you who know what's best for you and listening to the doctors, to the physios, to the training staff who are telling you to slow down. Sometimes it's for the greater good.
Yeah. And it's so crazy how the beautiful game of football has that dark side to it where you can get so your identity can get so wrapped up in it that when it's taken away from you, it hurts. It's tough. Like that's why it's good to speak to you over there because it's similar. No matter where you are, it's just the amount of effort, the amount of time, the amount of dedication it takes that you have to put into football. When it's taken away from you, it's like something's ripped out of you, and it's so
I agree.
difficult to transition. But it's interesting because that leads into like over here in the UK because of the academy system, a lot of players find it so hard to transition. So I was wondering, how do you think it's easier over there? Because a lot of players over in the UK by the age of 19, 20, if they have that serious injury, they don't really have something to fall back onto because they don't really have further education. So I was wondering whether it's easier over there in the States because you had at least your university or further education to fall back onto.
Yeah, that's a great actually I had never really thought about it like that, right? And it wasn't even until like a couple of years ago where I realized that and not even a couple of years ago, I realized that back when I was attending university, we had so many international players that were playing for top universities like mine. And um, you know, I think I thought at the end of the day, it was simply because certain players just wanted to have the education while playing football. I didn't realize that back then and even now that wasn't an option. You couldn't do both where you live, right? In the UK, you can't have your studies and your football at a high level. You need to pick one. And I was pretty naive back then. And now, so looking back at it now, I would say it probably is the slightest bit easier, and not just because we have our studies to fall back on. Because even then, right, I think if football is ripped away from you and you have a massive passion for it, it's not easy no matter what. Like, it doesn't matter what you have to fall back on, it's still the hardest decision you probably ever have to make. But I will equally say that it's also probably easier because there's just more to distract you here. Like, I imagine culturally, right, in the UK, football is everything. It's talked about everywhere. If you've been working towards that dream for decades, right, for years on end, there's no, if it's on all the time and you're constantly reminded of your shortcomings there's no easy way to deal with it, right? I think here in the States, because footballers, unless you're a designated player in the MLS, footballers for the most part, it's not a lucrative occupation, right? You don't make a lot of money doing it here like you would elsewhere. You can, don't get me wrong, if you're a top player, but if you're not, there's kind of a minimum wage that you make here. You have a ton of other sports to distract you from the game, right? Well, if you turn on the radio at any point in time, you probably won't hear about MLS. You probably hear about NFL or NBA. And don't get me wrong, soccer or football is growing every day, every month, every year here in the States. But there's just so much else to distract you from the game. And so for those reasons, I do think it's a little bit easier. I think it's easier to feel like, oh, you know what? I tried this thing that's not super popular in this part of the world. It's okay that I didn't make it because there really isn't a super high ceiling just yet in this country for footballers. I'll go do something else. It's easy to think that in your head. And so, I won't say it's the path that I went down. I love football through and through. Um, and for me personally, there was a time where I kind of had to forget about it. Like when I got injured, I almost had to put football down for like a year or two and just try to tune out, because if I tuned in, I would just be almost in a depressed state. Like I would be thinking about, why did this happen to me constantly?
Mm.
When in reality, it's not that simple. Just the circumstances that I was in were not because of any one person. They weren't because of me. It's just how the cards played out. So I think it's definitely a little bit easier and from a number of perspectives, but I do agree with your point. I think that university studies having that to fall back on, it's massive, man. Like it really is. Like the fact that you have options after football is done, you can move immediately into coaching if you'd like, right? Maybe be a graduate assistant somewhere at some university, and start trying to get your coaching credentials. But even if you didn't do that, you still have this university, these your studies that you are paying for, but that are going to open up doors for you after university is done. At least they should if you do it right. So that all of that, the combination of all those things does make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, and the investment into football and the mental toll that returns. It's interesting. There's a rising, demand for sports psychologists over here in the UK. Sports psychologists, player care for footballers because of that.
Yeah.
You know, the consequences of putting all that effort into football. I was wondering, did you have any experience with sports psychologists growing up in the academy system at FC Dallas or at university through that
Yeah,
injury?
yeah. Yeah. So I did, and look, it was very through FC Dallas, not so much. We relied heavily upon the individual coaching staff, right, to kind of be um our psychologist, so to speak, right? Because you had the head, the manager, right, the head coach who was more in charge of the tactics and making sure that we understood what we're supposed to be doing on the pitch. But for the most part, the day-to-day trainings, the individual sessions, they were all with kind of individual coaching staff that tended to look out for the well-being of the players. And so we all felt pretty confident going to those individual coaches, and if we needed to seek some of that mental guidance. And back then, right? Just the resources weren't there. In university, there were more resources from a mental standpoint, but I don't think they were sports psychologists per se. I definitely think those staff are needed now because it's a completely different world that we live in now as opposed to the one that I grew up in, where social media was in its earliest days, it was in its infancy. The noise around football, around players, the pressure that they put on themselves, I feel like all of that is amplified now because of how noisy social media is. Back then, if you avoided television and the newspapers for the most part, you were good, right? Like you were fine. Like you don't really have too much to worry about mentally. You could kind of plug in yourself, right? And I don't know. I just think it was a simpler time for players. Now, I wholeheartedly agree that there needs to be staff that looks after the well-being of the players mentally, because there's just so much more, I think, on a day-to-day basis for these players to be concerned with. That the game is bigger than it's ever been, right? So there's just more pressure naturally from a result standpoint. But I do think also just to unlock what a player is truly capable of, right? I remember managers and coaches that I had who would, before matches, would walk us through as a team, visualizing what we're doing on the pitch, right? Before we go out there, we would huddle up, and for 5 minutes, we would all kind of, have this candid, discussion, right, with our eyes closed, visualizing us making our pass, us making that cutting through ball, us making a tackle, the first tackle on the pitch, right? As a defender myself, I needed that first tackle on the pitch to happen in the first 2 or 3 minutes, just to get the nerves out, just to make sure I was ready to go. And that all started with me visualizing how the match itself was going to be played out from my perspective, especially for the big matches, right? Especially for the national championships, for the state championships, or whatever the case may be. FC Dallas has this long line of national championships at the youth academy level. And that comes from, I think, our staff helping us position ourselves in the best way possible, mentally and physically. So we didn't have tried and true, I think, sports psychologists, but we had coaching staff that were owning those roles or responsibilities from those roles and bringing that to the players in the best way they knew how.
Mm, makes sense. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
And how has how was the transition out of football practically? And how did like your experience in football influence that? Because over here, it's quite difficult. Like over here in the United Kingdom, where if you go through their football academy, it's football, football, football. You don't really get the qualifications or qualities to transition into other work spaces. So when you now go and apply for a job or you want to start something, it's like you're starting from scratch. You don't have the experience. So I wanted to hear how that was for you.
Yeah, I think no matter what, transitioning out of football is difficult. Whether it's from a mental standpoint or it's whether you feel qualified to go out there and contribute to the world. Um, the most difficult part for me personally was just my day to day. Right, my day to day when I was playing football. Right, you wake up. I get a little bit of food in me, and then I go for a run first thing in the morning. I come back, I do my studies. I probably get after my studies, get a lift in, do my lunch, take a nap, and then we have training for 3 hours in the afternoon. That was kind of my day to day, and then I had afterward rehab, study hall for my studies, and then I go to bed, do it all over again. That was my day to day. When I transitioned out of that, there were times in the first few months where I just didn't know what to do with myself. Right, I didn't know I didn't even feel motivated really to even go get a workout just to work out, right? Just for fitness sake, just to even stay in shape in some form or fashion. I didn't feel that motivated to do it. But I think that a mentor of mine, and I think you actually had a saying, the first time you and I met, regarding cultivating discipline and not motivation. And I wholeheartedly agree with that saying. I had a mentor of mine who kind of brought something to me that's in a similar way, saying, if you're disciplined about who you want to be, regardless of where football fits in, you will do the little things you need to do every day, regardless of what your occupation is, whether you're a footballer, you're an accountant, a banker, doesn't matter, right? If you're disciplined, you will find a way to keep football in your life, and you will do the things that you need to do to stay healthy consistently. And so I will say this: university prepared me for a job, I guess you could say, coming out of university and entering the workforce and just trying to find something to pay my bills, to keep things afloat. But the most difficult transition was just football not being a part of my day to day. Eventually, I got back to working out. I got back to running. I got back to doing all of those things that I still do to this day. But I do miss the training sessions. I miss the locker room banter. I miss away travel, right, with the team and kind of bonding a little bit before we go out there and we go to war with another club. So I miss some of those things day in and day out. But I will say the best part about university football here in the States is that it is now in this day and age pretty damn competitive. Some of the top teams in the country will produce talent that goes out and competes, either here in the States or abroad. I think of guys like Jack Harrison, who plays for Leeds United now, but had his own stint of university football here in the States. I think that we produce talented players, but at the same time, they're also players that have earned an education and are going to be able to use that to unlock other doors that maybe football just wasn't able to unlock for them. So for me, I was very fortunate. I pursued business after being injured for a while. I completed my degree, and I was very, very bullish on wanting to build something for myself in business. So I try to get as much experience as I can doing everything from sales to marketing to advertising while I was still in university. And I was recruited into Amazon corporate right out of college, right out of university. So I graduated with the role. I eventually got to move to Seattle, where Amazon corporate is located. I worked there for 6 or 7 years, learning how to build products, services, businesses. It's the education that I didn't even know that I needed, right? It was the education that I got after university that really opened up so many doors for me. So I'm very grateful. I think that at the end of the day, this was how it was supposed to be. I'm a massive football fan. I miss my playing days dearly. But I think that at the end of the day, they served a purpose. They served a greater purpose. I do believe my calling is in business. It's what I'm good at. It's what my day-to-day life is today. And football is still a massive part of it. I'm building a startup in the football space. But it's not something that my playing days have too much of an impact on anymore. In fact, I would say my fandom for football plays a much bigger role now.
Yeah. And what experience, or how's your experience in football helped you in business? Like, what characteristics from football have you, like, transferable skills are big things, or what are the skills that you've taken into business?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, competitive. That drive that I had in football, because I mean, at the end of the day, I was a fullback coming out, and you know, I wasn't always raised that way. I eventually had to transition because of my height. You know, I'm 5'10", and you know, when I wanted to, I originally wanted to play center back. Frankly, I was too small to be that role as a player. Moved to an outside back, a fullback role, and that's kind of where I owned my skills. Um, and I, because of my lack of height or lack of certain athleticism, I had to make up for it in other ways, right? I had to be competitive as hell when it came to my distribution, my positioning, my vision, my speed. All of those things had to really make up for the fact that I was a small defender. And that competitive drive is what got me there. Wasn't just competing against, you know, other teammates, other players on the other side of the pitch. I was competing against myself. The way that I always saw it was that if I improved just 1% every day, 1%, that's it. If I got better by 1% every single day, by the end of the year, I'd be over 300% better than I was last year. And that's how
That's
I
it.
always saw it. And so competition, my own inner mental competition, it still drives me to this day. I'm not competing against anybody in business today. In fact, I would say my startup is far and away different than what anybody else is building today. But I'm competing against myself. I want to do better work today than I did yesterday, than I did last week, than I did last month, than last year. Right. I think that that's what's allowed me to open doors for myself. I know when I was at Amazon, that competitive drive is what allowed me to kind of scale up within the company as fast as I did. It's just a hunger for being better today than I was yesterday. So competition for me is a massive transferable skill. And outside of that, I can't stress this part enough. Um, Teamwork and grit. And I know that sounds very cliche to say the teamwork part, but I firmly believe now, having done business now for almost 10 years, I could not have done it by myself. I think I needed, you know, people around me, whether it was mentors, whether it was coaches, whether it was just colleagues of mine now. I needed other folks to help me achieve some of the things that I've achieved throughout my business career. And I could not have done that as well as I've done it without understanding the dynamics of a team, right? Just like no one player can win a match holistically on their own, they need their team. A striker needs good service, good delivery, right? A keeper needs a good back line in front of them. You need a team. You need players around you who you trust, who do the job well, and you know, ultimately they hold you accountable. So teamwork, and I say grit because those dark days that I had as football ended prepared me for the real world in a way that I don't think anything else did. I didn't realize it back then, but at the end of the day, the world keeps turning, right? At the end of the day, the way that I see it, maybe it sounds a bit harsh, but I think at the end of the day, nobody cares. Nobody really
That's it.
cares, right? At the end of the day, if you exit football, if your playing days are done, the world keeps spinning. You know, you have to find something else. You have to be able to show grit in the face of adversity, and like it's something that's easy for me to say now here, looking back at my days and how much I struggled with it back then. Um, I'm so glad that I had that experience. As much as I miss playing football, as much as I wish I never got injured and I could have found a way to go, you know, to really have a long professional career, I'm so grateful that, you know, that learning experience came as early in my life as it did. Because I think it's positioned my mental in a way that allowed me to be gritty in other difficult moments, right? If something else difficult popped up, well, it's not as bad as my dream being taken away from me, right? So I'm going to get
Mm,
through this. I'm going to find a way to
yeah.
push past it, and I'm going to be successful. And so I think those three, those transferable skills, I think it's a big reason why, you know, companies here in the States, there are companies here in the States who do look for, you know, university athletes, right? Or, you know, those who have taken on studies as well as play to sport because they understand priorities, they understand teamwork, they understand competition, and they want to be the best. And so, that's really what's worked for me.
That's it. And what is Golz TV and why does the world need it?
That's a great question, man. Golz TV, it's my baby. It is the startup that I've been pursuing for just about a year now, and it's not my first startup. I will say that. What I've learned about myself since football has ended is that just the way that I was a leader in the locker room, or from a football perspective, I was never the best player on the pitch, but I was always the loudest. I was always the first one in, the first one into battle. I would bleed for my teammates. That's kind of how I always was. And same thing in the business world. I've always been curious about how companies operated, what it took to start one from scratch. And so this is not my first startup. I've had others that I've tried and I've failed at prior to this one. But with Golz TV, I do feel that this is something that can be around for the long term. And what Golz TV really is, GOLZ.TV, it is a football-centric streaming platform. That is the best way I could describe it in one sentence. It is a platform where, in an ideal world, all fan-made footy content, right? Everything from podcasts like the Beyond Football podcast to match day vlogs to highlights to trading cards to fantasy Premier League to whatever it may be. Every type of football content that can exist on the internet would all be pulled into one platform where any fan all over the world can just pick it up and view it on demand, right? The same way that users today go to YouTube or go to Netflix and try to dive into stories that they find interesting. I believe football fans need a destination on the internet where they can do the same thing for footy content, right? And I believe the mission that we're on here at Golz TV is not just to bring all the football content together, right? That's one thing. And for me personally, that's what I loved most about it. But with the mission, it's a little bit deeper than that. I believe a platform like this is necessary for the growth of the sport in America. I think that America is different than almost any other country in the world in the sense that we don't embrace football the same way that other countries do. It's a top 5 sport for us. And it's competing with other sports that are very big here. But at the same time, I believe soccer fans in America only know certain types of content that exist, right? They know MLS highlights. They know the occasional MLS podcast, maybe a tactics breakdown show. But that's really it. You don't get a ton of other unique or creative content around this game that's produced by fans here in the States because the game hasn't evolved to that point yet. What I want to show them is that the internet is full of content from all sorts of creators, all sorts of stories being told. The depths of football content are run very, very deep, and we haven't even scratched the surface on it yet. The spectrum is very wide. And so I think the best way to build up a culture around this game and make it a top 3, a top 2 sport is if we bring together the 2 biggest fan bases that make up soccer fans here in America, which are millennials like me, right? 30, 35 and above, and Gen Z, the ones who are kind of beneath me in age, right? So 20-year-old and younger. I think that bridging that gap that exists between them here in the States, because that is a very real problem, by introducing them to a platform and bring content to them that they wouldn't normally go out of their way to watch, right? So if I could get someone who's in Gen Z to start watching Major League Soccer, because according to the data, they don't really watch a ton of Major League Soccer, that would be a huge W, right? And vice versa. If I could get someone who's 40 years old to watch someone who plays FIFA on Twitch, right, and watches FIFA 23 content, that would be a huge W. I think that you can only do that if all of that content exists on the same platform and is available to be consumed at any moment of the day. And so that's what we're building here. I think personally, fans from all over the world would love to come and tune in. And we do get, I think currently we have users coming from over 60 plus different countries. I think it's great. But equally, it is made for the American fan. It is made to show America why this sport is going to be a top sport before we know it. And by the time the 2026 World Cup gets here, I would love for there to be some sort of a culture, right? I would consider that to be success. If we could say that Golz TV had an impact on America where we helped instill a culture around this game that fans from all over the world can sort of feel and embrace when they come here for the 2026 World Cup, I would consider that a massive win. I would consider that massive success, whether it's directly attributed to Golz TV or not. But that is something that we're very much bought into as part of our mission here at Golz TV.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's needed, man. It's getting bigger and bigger. I see it happening, especially with the US men's team.
We're hoping, man. We're hoping. The men's team is a really interesting state. I think that this is going to obviously, everyone's looking at the U.S. men's national team as like I don't know if we're calling it a golden generation of players. I do think that this is probably one of the most competitive sets of players that we've had, like a class of players, if you will. That were all kind of just born at the right time, and they're coming through and they performed decently at the World Cup. Eliminated in the round of 16. But I do think that a team this good should be doing more. So we'll see. I think at the 2026 World Cup, everyone's expecting big things out of the countries who are based in North America, right? So the US, Mexico, even Canada. And Canada, I mean, they won our region going into the 2022 World Cup. So there's a lot. I think over the next 3 years, we're going to really see this sport change this part of the world in a big, big way. It's just a matter of how big can we make it, right? How big can we make this thing? I don't want to compare us to any part of the world. I don't think that's fair. I don't think we should be trying to create what the Premier League and what the UK have. I don't think we should be trying to create, what South American football culture is like, right? Brazil, Argentina, like that culture is completely different than what Europe has, and that's fine. I think that the US and North America should strive to have its own culture around this game, right? Our own footy culture that people can feel and associate directly with fans from this part of the world. So the U.S. men's national team will have a massive role to play in that. But I do think that fan-made content like this podcast, for example, I think it's more of this is needed. We need more fans to continue to put themselves in a spotlight, create content that builds community around this game. And I do believe that one day fans will have as much power as legacy media will. 100%. I think that we're going to see fans that pull in way more viewers and command way more influence than the likes of ESPN, Sky Sports, Fox Sports, you name it. I think we're going to get there. It's just a matter of time.
That's it. And who is Jose beyond football? Now, after your experience at FC Dallas, college football, the injury, who are you beyond football?
It's a great question, man. I am a massively passionate, in this day and age, a massively passionate fan who is empathetic of the player journey, who's empathetic of the fan journey, and ultimately is willing to dedicate my life to growing this game to a point that it's never reached on this part of the world. I firmly believe that. I think that whether we're talking about me personally or my family, this game is a part of our lives every single day. And if I can even reach a small handful of people with our mission, if I can be as genuine as our company's mission is every single day, and if I could bring just casual American sports fans into this game in some form or fashion, get them to watch football because they never have before, that I would consider my own journey as a person successful. So that's who I am, man. I'm a massively passionate fan who wants to create more passionate fans on this side of the world.
Amazing. And you touched on your mentor and mentorship. I was wondering, why is it important to have a mentor as a young footballer or as a young man or a young person in life? How has that shaped your journey?
I think it's super important, man. And you look, I don't think you have to be necessarily a footballer or an athlete to build up strong mental awareness, right? I would say awareness is probably the key word that I've grown to love and understand as I've gotten older. Being extremely aware of who you are mentally, physically, emotionally. Being extremely aware of who you are helps guide you, right? It helps you make decisions that serve you well as a person. And so for me, that started with football, but then it was the adversity that came that, from not playing football anymore. And then entering business, discovering a passion that I never knew I really had. And understanding that maybe this was the life I was supposed to have. That football led me to this point, and now I'm here. Now I'm building other things with a passion that I didn't even know I had. I think if you're extremely aware of who you are on multiple levels, you can make decisions that serve you well long term. And so for me, that's not just physical, right? I mean, understanding your body is one thing, but you have to, in a very, very strong way, understand yourself mentally and emotionally. Otherwise, and I've seen it happen, right? You see players kind of almost lie to themselves. Yeah, I want to do this. Yes, I want to do that. Here in the States, in fact, there's I don't know if this is a thing overseas, Daniel, but I do know here in the States, you get a lot of parents and players who hire individual personal trainers, right, to come train with their sons, with their daughters, right? Give them extra work, extra touches on the ball, things like that to kind of better their game. But in my opinion, if you need that, right, if you need to hire someone to come and help you get those individual touches, I don't think you know yourself that well just yet. I think you're still telling yourself that you love football and you want to play this game. But I know when I was a kid, no one needed to tell me to go outside and touch a football, or to go outside and hit passes off of a wall, or to go out there and do lob passes, or whatever the case may be. Like, I did all of that because I had a passion for this game. I wanted to play as much as I possibly could. If I was awake, I was thinking about playing football. And I think here you have a lot of players and young ones that are convincing themselves, maybe because their parents want them to, but they're convincing themselves this is what they want to do, this is where they want to be, when in reality it's requiring external motivation to get them there. So the mental aspect of your game cannot be understated, but I would say being mentally aware, right? Not kidding yourself, understanding who you are and what you really want to do. You're just setting yourself up for success, and to me that's the most important thing.
What advice would you give young footballers in finding that success or fulfillment beyond their football careers?
Be brave. Be brave. I think that to me serves so many purposes, but that was the best advice someone ever gave me when I was playing was don't be scared to make a mistake. Because if you are, you're going to make one. And when you do make one, you're going to put yourself through the mental ringer. It's the same thing for, being successful in any aspect of life post football, right? Be brave. At the end of the day, if you know that this is not what you want to be doing, don't do it. Life is too short, right? At the end of the day, football, everyone has their time in the sun, right? At some point, we're all told to stop playing the game. At one point or another, we're told by a doctor or by our body or by some higher being, right? Who knows? But at the end of the day, we're all told that we can no longer play this game. So play as long as you can, right? As long as you love it. But when that passion goes away, or if that passion is redirected to something else, like for me, it was business, listen to it, right? Be brave. Don't push it off. It is your inner being telling you to go out and pursue something else that you may love. Just because you love football, it doesn't mean it's the only thing you can be passionate about, right? There's so many different areas of life that you can dive into that would make you just as happy, if not happier, than you were when you played football, right? You haven't discovered them yet. So be brave, be courageous. Don't be scared to make a mistake. That's the advice that I would give, and listen to yourself. Yeah, 9 times out of 10, your gut is probably right.
Boy, you've been dropping real serious gems, man. We're gonna finish off with 3 last questions. So, what is your favorite football moment of all time?
Oh man, that's a good one. As a player or as a fan?
As a player.
As a player. Man, it has to be. So the highest moment that I probably had in university football post FC Dallas Academy was making to the Final Four of the national championships. But I didn't even play that much once we got out of conference. So it was great to be a part of the team at that stage, but I was still a freshman, very much a young player, and we were relying upon experienced players at that point. My favorite moment, individual moment, it wasn't a trophy, it wasn't a final, it wasn't anything along those lines. I think it was when I got admitted into the academy, to be honest. I think in this part of the world, I think most people realize by now that US is very much pay to play, that you have to at times live in a part of the country where you can afford to receive better coaching, better education around the game, and just get access to better talent, things like that. Right? It's pay to play. If you can afford better coaching, you will go farther in this country. But I grew up, as I mentioned before, very humble beginnings, and I came up in an area that I just didn't have the access to better coaching or to better players to play against. I was just playing all the time. I was just playing as much as I possibly could. I would play with my dad and in the local Sunday leagues against grown men when I was a kid. I was just playing as much as I possibly could. And when the academy was announced that they were going to be creating one and they wanted to have open tryouts, it didn't matter where you were from, as long as you were in the this part of the country, you could try out. I loved the idea of doing it, but in reality, I thought I wasn't going to make it. Right, there was just no way. You had all these players who had access to personal trainers and coaches and the best facilities and things like that. I was like, if they're picking 20-25 players, there's plenty of them in better neighborhoods and in better parts of the state that they would choose. And ultimately, as they were winding down the cuts, I thought at some point I was going to be someone that was let go. And I wasn't. When I made the final roster and I saw who my new teammates were going to be and how heavily talked about they were and how some of them were already kind of either receiving pro offers or getting pro scouts coming to our matches, I mean, it almost validated all the work I had put in, right? And it also validated the fact that I didn't need to spend, my parents didn't need to spend a ton of money on an expensive coach just so that I can make it to the next level. It just required me to be disciplined, passionate, and work as hard as I possibly could. So for me, that individual moment, being the first class of a really cool of an academy that's now gone on to win several national championships, gone on to produce several national team stars, several players abroad. I'm very proud to continue to support FC Dallas. But that for me was definitely a moment that I've never really forgotten, because it's just it's validated so much of the work that I put in.
Yeah. What book has significantly impacted your life?
Oh man. This is actually kind of a no-brainer. There's two. And they're very different. Both, I would say, one's from the lens of business, more from the lens of life. The first one is The Power of Broke, by Damon John. And I think that there's a lot of life lessons in there too, but it's more from the standpoint of business. It just he tells several different stories from very prominent individuals on the business front, who explain scenarios they have gone through, where their backs were against the wall and they had no choice but to succeed. Right, the power of broke, and basically the overarching message of the book was, you don't need resources. In fact, 9 times out of 10, your biggest advantage can be that you have nothing, that your back's against the wall, and that you have no choice but to be successful, because the alternative would be, right, dying, going away, losing everything. That is your alternative if you're not successful. So you have no other choice but to be successful. That book for me moved mountains in my mind. I think it showed me when I was first starting in the business world that as long as you have a vision, as long as you have a decent small team around you, and the hard work and discipline needed to kind of make it successful, you had everything you needed. You didn't need anything else, right? So the power of broke for me was massive. And then there is Shoe Dog. I had to go look at it, make sure. I was going to say Phil Knight's book, but Shoe Dog, for those who aren't aware, Shoe Dog is the book, the story of Nike's founder and kind of everything he poured into his career when he first got the idea for creating a pair of running shoes that were nice, aesthetic, that were not just made for runners, but made for people of fashion and everything in between. It's his journey, especially in the earliest days of it all, was insane. I mean, the guy going to live in Hawaii for months on end because didn't know what to do, wanted to do with his life, to traveling to Asia and selling an idea that he hadn't even put pen to paper on to massive shoe companies. I mean, the story of Nike is insane, to be honest, and the fact that brand is very much a household brand today just kind of validates all the work that I'm trying to put in for Golz TV right now. So yeah, man, those two books for me were massive.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure to have you on, Jose. Thank you very much. I know the viewers are going to pick up so many gems from that. How can people connect with Golz TV and you?
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Look, so Golz TV, I think, look, if you want to learn more about the platform, again, completely football-centric streaming platform, all video content, head over to golz.tv, GOLZ.tv. You can see more about our mission. You can see more about the creators who are on the platform today. Go check that out. Outside of that, I'm a pretty adamant footy fan on Twitter. I follow, if anyone wants to know who I support outside of FC Dallas here in the States, I'm a massive Barcelona and Arsenal fan. So I talk quite a bit about them on Twitter. I keep up with socials for the most part, but between running a business and trying to keep my family happy and give them the attention they deserve, every now and then I'm somewhat slow to respond to things, but they can find me. I believe it's at It's Bromigo, which is a gamer tag I've had as a FIFA player for I don't know how many years now. It's probably been like 15 plus years. But I use it for all of my socials. So you guys can find me there. And otherwise, Daniel, man, thank you so much for having me on the show as a guest. This was awesome. There were stories that I've shared today that I've never really kind of told anybody publicly. So I appreciate it, man.
No problem. My pleasure. So make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Leave a little review if you're listening on Spotify. And till next time, we out. Beyond football.